would show you, reduced chance of injury and just better on the joints and the body and everything. But it's just the way football was meant to be played. There was one guy in particular who chose not to perform those duties. He didn't make that same mistake. The football had barely reached Darren Sproles when the Superdome began to shake. It was December 26th, 2011, 9 yards, a touchdown, and a passing record that had belonged to Dan Marino for 27 years was suddenly mine. My teammates came running. The crowd was standing. Marino's name appeared on the stadium screen beside my own. That moment should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like a door opening. Long before I understood protections, coverages, or the weight of an NFL huddle, I had watched men like Marino make the position seem larger than life. Years later, I was breaking their records, learning from their example, and discovering how little numbers explained about the men behind them. So when I was asked to name the 5 players who represented greatness to me, I did not begin with the record book. I went back to the men who showed me how a quarterback survives, prepares, leads, falls, and returns. The first was waiting in San Diego before anyone knew what I might become. Number 5, Doug Flutie. The first time I entered an NFL game, Doug Flutie was sitting on the bench with his helmet off. It was November 4th, 2001 against Kansas City. We were down 19-0 when I was sent in. Until then, most of my Sundays had been spent standing beside Doug, watching him identify the pressure, change of protection, and move the offense before the ball was even snapped. Now, he was out of the game, and I was 22 years old, trying to keep the afternoon from getting away from us. I completed a short throw, then another. We began moving the chains, and the stadium started making noise again. Late in the fourth quarter, we drove 89 yards. I found Freddie Jones for a 20-yard touchdown, and suddenly we were ahead 20-19. That was my first touchdown in the NFL. I remember the celebration lasting only a few moments. Kansas City took the ball, drove back down the field, and scored with less than 2 minutes remaining. We lost 25-20. My debut gave me nearly everything in one afternoon: a comeback, a touchdown, a lead, then the walk back to the locker room after losing it. Doug was 39 when I arrived in San Diego. Early in our time together, he told me that one day we would be competing for the starting job. There was no speech around it. He knew why the Chargers had drafted me, and I knew he had no intention of stepping aside. What I noticed was how he played when the pocket began to close. Doug rarely stayed where the defense expected him to be. He slipped outside, changed the angle, and forced linebackers to choose between chasing him and protecting the passing lane. I was still trying to execute every play exactly as it appeared in the playbook. Doug could keep a play alive after the playbook had stopped being useful. By 2002, I had become the starter. The following season, I struggled and the job went back to him. His first start came against Minnesota in San Diego. I stood on the sideline while Doug, 2 weeks past his 41st birthday, threw 2 touchdown passes and ran for 2 more. One of those throws went to a young Antonio Gates for the first touchdown of his career. We won 42-28. I did not enjoy watching from the sideline, but I watched closely. Doug had spent nearly 2 years waiting for another start. When it came, he was ready before the rest of us had time to wonder whether he still could be. He never needed to tell me what preparation looked like. I saw it that afternoon. Years later, when younger quarterbacks came to me with questions, I answered them because Doug had once answered mine. Then another veteran reached out to me during a playoff run, even though I had just helped end his season. Number 4, Kurt Warner. A week before we faced Arizona, Kurt Warner had thrown 5 touchdown passes against Green Bay. He was 38 years old, but the ball was still leaving his hand before the rush could settle around him. He did not need much space. He only needed the defense to show him one mistake, and by the time it appeared, the football was already gone. On January 16th, 2010, the Cardinals came into the Superdome for the divisional round. They scored on the first play. Tim Hightower ran 70 yards, and the building went quiet almost immediately. We answered with a long drive. Lionel Hamilton scored from 1 yard out. Reggie Bush broke a long run. Then I found Jeremy Shockey for a 17-yard touchdown. By the end of the first quarter, we led 21-7, but I never felt comfortable with Kurt on the other sideline. His game was built on timing. He stood in the pocket, read the middle of the field, and delivered the ball before a receiver looked open. Against Green Bay, that rhythm had turned the game into a track meet. Our job was to interrupt it before Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Bolden could begin controlling the afternoon. Arizona pulled within 21-14. On our next possession, Sean Payton called a flea flicker. I handed the ball to Reggie, got it back, and saw Devery Henderson breaking deep. The pass went for 44 yards and a touchdown. That play changed the afternoon. Later in the second quarter, Kurt threw an interception. He left the game briefly after the return, then came back for the second half. By then, the score had moved away from Arizona. We won 45-14. I threw 3 touchdown passes. Kurt finished without one. At the end, he walked off the field with his season over. He retired later that month. But that was not the last thing he gave me. As we continued toward the Super Bowl, Kurt reached out. Trent Dilfer did too. They offered advice about how to approach that week and how to keep the game from becoming lost inside everything surrounding it. Kurt did not owe me that. We had just beaten his team and ended his season. He could have left the moment behind him. Instead, he made sure another quarterback did not enter the biggest week of his career without hearing from someone who had already lived through it. Doug Flutie showed me how a veteran prepares the player behind him. Kurt Warner showed me that the same responsibility can cross another sideline. Then there was a quarterback I first knew from television, a man who kept returning to the Super Bowl until the ending finally changed. Number 3, John Elway. When I think about John Elway, I do not begin with the 2 championships at the end of his career. I remember the years before them. By the time I was trying to become a college quarterback, John had already taken Denver to 3 Super Bowls and lost all 3. Those defeats followed him everywhere. Every January, the same question returned. Could he get back? And if he did, would the ending be any different? Then came January 25th, 1998. Denver faced Green Bay at Qualcomm Stadium in San Diego. The Packers were the defending champions. Brett Favre was in his prime. John was 37, and for most of the afternoon, the game stayed close enough that every possession felt heavy. Green Bay scored first. Denver answered. The Broncos led 17-7, then watched the Packers cut it to 17-14 before halftime. Early in the third quarter, Green Bay tied the game. Late in that quarter, Denver faced 3rd and 6 at the Packers' 12-yard line. John took the shotgun snap and dropped back. The coverage held. He stepped forward, tucked the ball, and ran near the first down marker. 3 defenders closed on him. He could have gone down short. Instead, he left his feet. The hit turned him sideways in the air. His body spun before he came down across the line to gain. The play lasted only a few seconds, but it told you how tired he was of leaving that stage without what he came for. 2 plays later, Terrell Davis scored and Denver moved ahead. The game still was not finished. Green Bay tied it again. John later completed a 23-yard pass to Howard Griffith on the drive that set up Davis for the winning touchdown. Then Denver's defense stopped Favre one final time. The Broncos won 31-24. I was still years away from understanding what it meant to carry an NFL offense through a postseason. Back then, I saw the arm, the movement, and the courage to run into contact. Later, I understood the harder part. John returned after the losses. He returned after people had decided what his story was supposed to be. He came back to the same game that had embarrassed him 3 times, and he did not protect himself when the season came down to 1 third down. That is why the helicopter play stayed with me. It was not graceful. It was necessary. Years later, after I was benched in San Diego and then injured my shoulder, I learned how difficult returning could be. John had shown the ending could still change. The next man on my list gave me a different kind of measure. For 27 years, every quarterback knew the number he had left behind. Number 2, Dan Marino. I came close to Dan Marino's record once before. In the final game of the 2008 season, we played Carolina in the Superdome. I needed 402 yards. I threw for 386. We lost 33-31, and I finished 15 yards short. I remember leaving that season knowing exactly how close 15 yards could feel. 3 years later, the record followed us into another Monday night. It was December 26, 2011. Atlanta was in town. The division was still at stake, and I entered the game needing 305 yards to pass the mark Dan had set in 1984. Everybody knew the number except the person trying hardest not to hear it. During the week, I kept answering questions about Marino. On the sideline, after I found Robert Meacham for a touchdown in the third quarter, somebody told me I was close. I did not ask how close. I told them to leave it alone. It felt like talking to a pitcher during a no-hitter. That was what I admired about Marino's game. He played fast without looking hurried. The ball came out before the rush reached him. His feet barely needed to move. He could see the opening, make the decision, and finish the throw while the defense was still reacting. In 1984, he threw for 5,084 yards in only his second NFL season. For 27 years, that number stayed where he had left it. We led Atlanta comfortably in the fourth quarter, but our offense had gone 3-and-out on 3 straight possessions. Sean Payton kept us on the field because we needed to finish properly. We reached the Atlanta 9-yard line. I took the snap and saw Darren Sproles underneath. It was a simple throw, 9 yards, the kind of completion we had made hundreds of times. Sproles caught it and crossed the goal line. At first, I only saw the face masks of my offensive linemen coming toward me. Carl Nix tried to lift me. The rest of the team arrived before I could move. Sproles had spiked the football, and Jimmy Graham went after it before it could disappear into the stands. Only then did I understand what had happened. We won 45-16. In the locker room, the team made me speak. I held the football, but I kept thinking about the men who had protected me and caught the passes that carried us there. A few minutes later, Marino publicly congratulated me. That mattered. He did not treat the record like something stolen from him. He welcomed the next name. Marino gave every quarterback after him a number to chase. The man at number 1 gave us something harder to measure. He showed us what to do when the season came down to one final drive. Number 1, Joe Montana. I was 10 years old when Joe Montana walked into the final huddle of Super Bowl 23. San Francisco trailed Cincinnati 16-13. There were 3 minutes and 20 seconds left. The ball rested at the 49 ERS 8-yard line, and 92 yards stood between Montana and another championship. Before the drive began, he looked toward the stands and pointed out John Candy. That detail stayed with football people because everyone else understood the pressure. Montana looked calm enough to notice an actor in the crowd. Then he went to work. He opened with a completion to Roger Craig. He found John Frank near the sideline. Cincinnati forced a 3rd down, and Montana answered with another throw to Craig. The chains moved. The clock kept falling. There was no desperate heave, no attempt to win the game with one heroic pass. Montana kept taking what the defense allowed. 8 yards, 7 yards, a throw underneath, another 1st down. That was the part of his game I admired most. He did not allow the size of the moment to change the size of the decision. With less than a minute remaining, San Francisco reached the Cincinnati 14. Montana threw incomplete on 1st down. On the next snap, he saw John Taylor crossing the middle of the end zone. The pass traveled 10 yards. Taylor caught it with 34 seconds left. San Francisco won 20-16. Montana completed 8 of 9 passes on that final drive. But when I thought about him as a young quarterback, I did not think first about the 8 completions. I thought about the huddle. 11 men entered it with the season slipping away, and they left believing the field was still manageable. Years later, I learned how difficult that was. A quarterback cannot ask 10 other players to become calm while his own voice is changing. He cannot rush the protection call, stare at the clock, or let one missed throw affect the next snap. The huddle feels everything. That is why Joe is number 1. Doug Flutie showed me how to survive when the league doubted my size. Kurt Warner showed me how a veteran could help the quarterback who had just defeated him. John Elway showed me how to return after public failure. Dan Marino gave me a standard that lasted for 27 years. Montana gave me the complete picture. Preparation before the snap, accuracy after it, control of the huddle, patience when the field became long. And when the biggest drive of his life began at his own 8-yard line, he never made the moment look larger than the next play. I spent my career trying to give my teammates that same feeling. The records came later, the championship came later, the example came first. Years have passed since that football landed in Darren Sproles' hands and the Superdome rose around us. I still have the record ball. I can hold it, turn it over, and see the marks left from that night. But the older I get, the less that ball feels like proof of what I accomplished. It feels like something that was handed to me. Doug Flutie was there when I entered the league and did not yet understand how quickly a career could change. He showed me how to prepare, whether I was starting, waiting, or fighting to earn the job back. Kurt Warner was standing on the other sideline when our playoff paths crossed. Afterward, when he could have simply gone home, he reached back and helped me prepare for what came next. John Elway showed me that losing on the largest stage did not have to become a permanent identity. He kept returning until the ending belonged to him. Dan Marino left a number that stood for 27 years. Chasing it made me better. The way he congratulated me after I passed it taught me how records should be released when the next player arrives. And Joe Montana gave me the first picture of what calm looked like when an entire season had been reduced to one drive, 5 quarterbacks, 5 different lessons. None of them knew at the time exactly what I would carry from them. That is how football works. A younger player is always watching. Sometimes he is in the same meeting room. Sometimes he is across the field. Sometimes he is 10 years old sitting in front of a television and trying to understand why one man never seems afraid. Eventually, the younger player grows older. The records change. The names move down the list. Another quarterback takes the ball and begins chasing what came before him. That does not erase the men who were there first. It proves their work is still moving.